Right, there are a number of business models that we use in e-commerce. The first one is a virtual storefront. Now, this is basically selling our products as though we are selling them from a shop, right, from a physical shop. However, we are doing this over the internet, and some examples there are Amazon and Red Envelope. The second model is an information broker, and where we give users specific information about products and pricing information, pricing comparisons, for example. Right? And normally the revenue that is generated here is from advertising on the site. We'll be talking about these different revenue models, even though they are mentioned here. The third type of model is a transaction broker. And the transaction broker is the go between, all right, the link, right, between buyer and seller by processing the online sales transactions. And so transaction brokers would be the companies that provide things like payment gateways, etc. An online marketplace, right, a digital environment where buyers and sellers can meet. Right? An example would be eBay, where sellers are selling their products and buyers, right, can place their bids to buy those products, and then the highest bidder will win the auction. Right? So the online marketplace is a sort of virtual market where buyers and sellers can transact business together. Another category is the content provider, right? So they create revenue by providing digital content like news, photos, uh, companies like iTunes, for example, games.com. Then we have social networks, right? An online meeting place where people with similar interests can get together. A good example would be LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is used a lot by people to further their careers, to meet people who are working in the same industry. A portal, which is the initial entry into the web, and then it directs us to a number of other places over the internet, and the service provider, right, which will provide applications like photo sharing and video sharing, right, like YouTube, for example, again, where people can um, exchange ideas, where people can put up their own creative ideas, where people can put up their own sort of products, and other people can have a look at those products. Now, when it comes to revenue models, this is how we make money, right? So the first type is the mail order revenue model, and the income here is derived from selling goods from a virtual shopfront. It's mimicking the brick and mortar concept, where we are selling money over the counter, where we are selling products and getting money over the counter. Here we are selling products, getting money via our virtual shopfront. A digital content revenue model, we generate income through selling digital content. News, for example. Sometimes we'll find digital content sites, right, selling news about a particular football club, for example. Right, so the fans for that football club will go to that site to get information about what the team is doing, about individual players, about matches. Right? And normally the revenue there is by selling the digital content. You have to be subscribed in order to be able to look into that content to get that information. A third revenue model would be advertising supported revenue model. We generate income by selling advertising on the website. There are certain people who write blogs, for example, and they charge companies for placing adverts on their website. And obviously, the more popular your blog is, the more you can charge for advertising on your site. Other revenue models, an advertising subscription mixed revenue model. This is where income is derived through subscriptions, but also through advertising. Now, because people are subscribing to these sites, the content of advertising will be much lower, right? Because there is money being made from subscriptions, and obviously people who are subscribing don't want to be bombarded by a lot of adverts. And the final model is a fee-for-service revenue model. You pay per service or by the number of transactions that are processed. For example, with cloud computing, when you agree with a content service provider, an application service provider, you pay according to the hours of usage that you have made over that month with that content provider. The term commerce, it's a growing industry, right? Made possible through the advances in mobile phone technology. The fact that we can use and the fact that our mobile phones, our smartphones have become computers within themselves, right? It has given rise to this commerce. And in fact, on the next slide, we're going to see that there was a point where transactions made over mobile phones, over smartphones, exceeded transactions made via traditional PCs. Like in fact, it was predicted in 2010 that sometime in 2013, the sales from mobile users would exceed the sales from traditional desktop users. Now, this was predicted in 2010, and in fact, it was basically bang on, right? Because in 2016, right, it was predicted, or was it? Okay. And in 2016, right, mobile devices, here is a headline, driving 56% of traffic. Right? And these are some comparatives with desktop and mobile accesses. The average time on site is still longer when browsing from a desktop. The average pages visited is higher from desktop browsing. The average bounce rate, the bounce rate is when users land on a page and then immediately leave. Right? With mobile phones, the bounce rate is much higher. Now, how do we make electronic payments? A number of ways. The traditional way of paying for purchases over the internet, over e-commerce, was via debit and credit cards. Now, initially, there was a lot of mistrust and there was a lot of fraud that was carried out on debit and credit card payments. It is still a very common payment method. There are still issues with credit card fraud. However, new technologies have improved security and have decreased credit card fraud. And nowadays, you also have online authentication of card details. It's not just inputting your card number and your CCV number and the expiry date, right? Sometimes you are also asked additional questions to ensure that the user of that card, the person who is inputting those card details, is the rightful owner to that card. Another way is using digital wallets, and the digital wallet functions like a physical wallet. It is an app on a smartphone, and you hold your bank details and other documents on your app. So it's like carrying a physical wallet around with you, and when you need a document, when you need to transfer money from your account, you can use your digital wallet to make payments. So users can make electronic commerce transactions quickly and securely. And credentials are passed to a merchant's terminal using near field communication, NFC. Right? You don't need to put a card into a reader, whatever, but with near field communication, right, the transaction is authenticated immediately. So this is the way that a digital wallet will have, right, all the details, right, on your smartphone. Another way of making payments over e-commerce is by using an accumulated balance digital payment system. Here, the purchases are accumulated and paid at intervals. It is like using a credit card. However, it is not using your credit card. It is useful especially for people who do not wish to use their credit cards online. Right? So the same concept applies with a credit card. Your transactions are accumulated, and at the end of the month, you pay your bill. You pay your credit card bill. This has the same concept, but without using your credit card. Your purchases are accumulated, and then at the end of a period, you make your payment by traditional methods. Another way is by having stored value payment systems. A good example here is PayPal. So the customer will hold an account with PayPal. You enter your credit card details just once when you open the account, and then with every purchase, you don't need to enter credit card details. You log into your PayPal account, you authorize the payment, and PayPal will automatically take that money out of your credit card, right, and pay the transaction. However, your credit card details do not appear anywhere, so it makes it more secure. You don't need to give your credit card details with each sale. And nowadays, PayPal accounts can also be used to receive credits. If you know somebody's um, email address and you know that he has a PayPal account and you want to remit money to that person, you can do it through PayPal. Digital checks, right? These are work exactly like a physical check. However, they are digital. No paperwork is involved. Right? It's a messaging transfer system that will send funds from the customer's bank to the merchant's bank account. So the message is first directed to the receiver of the funds, to the merchant, who endorses the check and presents it to his bank to collect the funds. And this is the way it works. So you have a payer and the payee, right? The payee has sent goods or services to the payer sends a digital check to the payee. The payee deposits it with his bank, and then the banks themselves will communicate to transfer money from the payer's account to the payee's account. Electronic billing, nowadays, this is becoming much more common. So the customer will receive the bill online and that bill is paid automatically unless the customer makes a stop on it. That bill is paid automatically after some days, right? Because the supplier will send a transaction file to the bank and the bank will debit each customer and credit the supplier's account. Now, because it is cost reducing even for the supplier, right? The supplier may give a discount to the customer if he uses e-billing and e-payments. Now, payment may be online using credit or debit cards or a digital payment system. Peer-to-peer payments, a good example here is Revolut. You transfer funds between two parties using their individual banking accounts, right? Through an online or mobile app. And you can find other users using their username, their email address, phone contacts, things like that. Very easy to use, very convenient. There is also the facility, if you are a group of friends who went out for a meal, there is also the facility to share the bill, split the bill between the number of people, and each person's account will be debited and the total money transferred the to the supplier, to the outlet. Cryptocurrency payments, right? Cryptocurrency is based on blockchain technology. Essentially, this is a decentralized digital ledger where transactions are recorded and there is a greater level of security. Now, each cryptocurrency is managed by its own particular network. There is no central authority that manages cryptocurrency. And there is an article there at the back, if you look at reference 8 in your spare time, that the author is claiming that cryptocurrency is the future of e-commerce. Right? The author is claiming that most payments in future, most e-commerce payments in future will be using cryptocurrency. And finally, we see micropayment systems, right? Sometimes you need to pay for small value items, going on public transport, for example, buying a newspaper, right? And these small value items can cause a problem. First of all, because if we pay by credit card, probably the seller will not accept credit card payment because the charges by the banks would be much higher than the profit element on these small value items. So micropayment systems make payments for these items feasible. And it works similarly to accumulated balance digital payment system. So you are accumulating your purchases and then at the end of a period you pay just with one transaction. Next, we're going to have a look at the concept of shopping carts. Right? Initially, with e-commerce, we didn't have the concept of a shopping cart as such. It was via
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
And before we start something else, with regards to digital check, do you think is it popular? Because I believe direct payment, bank direct payments, and Revolut, for example, are more popular.
Yes.
I believe that it's being used. Am I right or not?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are right. I can't think of an example where I've seen a digital check working, to be honest. All right, but it's one of the methods of payment. Obviously, if you look around the world, there are different payment methods as well.
Yes.
For example, my son works for a company, a Uruguayan company, believe it or not. Okay, they've got a branch in Malta. But the concept in South America is that credit cards can only be used for internal purchases. You can't use a credit card to buy over the internet, for example. Okay, so these companies, they create. Have you heard of AstroPay? Right, those of you who follow English football, you will see AstroPay adverts all over the place. Because AstroPay was the parent company of the company that I am talking about, right? And they facilitate these payments, right, by the people in these areas, in these markets, right? They facilitate payments when they buy something over the internet. For example, AstroPay do a lot of business with one of the major betting sites. I forgot what its name is. Like one of the main betting sites, right? They do a lot of the transactions are done over AstroPay. Because in certain countries, as I said, you can't use a credit card for foreign purchases, right? So they use these other methods of payments. I mean, the ones that we've gone through are not exhaustive. There are other methods of payment, but right, if we had to mention them all, it will take us a whole week, I think.
No, just ask about it because I think it's not popular and
yeah, some of them, even the accumulated balance payment system.
Okay.
right?
Thanks
Unless
a
it
lot.
is for small items, it is not that diffused, it is not that used. As you said, most payments I think are done over PayPal, over Revolut, by credit cards. Those are the main payment methods, basically.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Now, with shopping carts, as I was saying, initially we had online ordering forms, and they were quite laborious to fill in. And then eventually they were replaced by the shopping cart concept. Basically, this is like you're going through a supermarket, putting items in your trolley. Right? You can remove items, you can add items, so you can with a shopping cart on e-commerce. It is much easier, right, to order multiple items, to edit your shopping cart. If you have second thoughts about something that you don't want to buy, you can remove it. Right? So you can edit your cart contents anytime before going to checkout. And when we proceed to checkout, right, this is right where the transaction is recorded. And by the time you record, until you press the checkout button, right, the transaction is kept in sort of in abeyance. All right, if you are picking items, they will be flagged that they are not available because someone else is buying them. But then, if you abandon your session, right, those items will go back to be available. When you press the checkout button, but this is where you finally confirm that you are going to finalize um, your session. Right? So the e-commerce software will now calculate the bill. It will calculate any tax that you need to pay, any delivery costs, and if there are any discounts, it will reduce. It will deduct those discounts from your bill. It will present the bill total for payment, and then the user will check or will choose the payment method. And while the payment is being done, the transaction processing will switch to a secure communication state. You will notice either a padlock on your status bar at the bottom, or the HTTP will turn into HTTPS, which means that it is a secure site. Any other questions so far? Okay, so let's have a look at the transaction cost model. Now, if you remember, right, some weeks back, when I talked about the different approaches that we take when we need to develop an information system. So we look for where the major focus is going to lie. Right? Now, this is the major focus. It doesn't mean that the other things are not important. And we had seen three different types of systems: a banking system, a management information system, and a point of sale system. And we saw that the focus in these three different systems, the focus is different. With the banking system, the major focus is decision making. With MIS, the major focus is data and information. And with a point of sale system, the major focus is transaction cost. Right? It doesn't mean that decisions and data and information are not important in a supermarket point of sale system. But our main focus here would be transaction costs. Now, right, what category does an e-commerce system belong to? Where would the major focus be of an e-commerce system? Who can tell me? Decisions, data and information, or transaction costs? The major focus.
Transaction, I believe.
Transactions. Because here we're talking about the financial part of things, the financial side of things. Okay, we need to take decisions, we need to have information available, But here the main focus will be transaction cost. Right? Now the transaction cost model is based on the fact that the organization is viewed as a set of contractual arrangements that govern sets of transactions. Thousands of transactions happen every day in an organization. Now with transaction, we don't only mean transactions between the organization and its suppliers to buy, to purchase goods, or transactions between the organization and its customers in sales. There are a lot of internal transactions as well. Issuing stocks for production, for example, that is a transaction. When a production batch is created, is finalized, that is another transaction. Right? Paying our employees at the end of the month, those are transactions. Right? So we can look at an organization as thousands of transactions. And transactions might need a contractual arrangement. Now, with the transaction cost model, we have the hypothesis of opportunistic behavior. Now, this happens because one part of the transaction, one side of the transaction, has more knowledge than the other side of the transaction, the other person or the other company in the transaction. This is where we've just seen information asymmetry. Right? Because there is an imbalance in the amount of information that they know. So the person who has more knowledge of the transaction may behave opportunistically, may try to make capital out of his additional knowledge. Now, normally it is the supplier who will have more information than the customer. Right? So the supplier might suppress information that if the customer knows about it, it would negatively impact the price or the willingness of the potential buyers to purchase. The supplier knows, let's say that the supplier is selling a second-hand car and he knows that it's been in a bad crash and the chassis is in a dangerous condition. So he might behave opportunistically. He will not tell the customer, "Hey, look, you're playing with your life if you're buying this car." Because obviously, if the customer, if the potential customer knows about that fact, then he's not going to buy that car, or he's going to really reduce the price of that car. In some cases, however, it is the buyer who has some superior knowledge. Recently, I was reading there was an artwork, right, a masterpiece that was sold for millions of dollars at auction. And the person who sold it had bought it from a previous owner for peanuts. Because the previous owner didn't know that that was a painting by one of the famous painters. I forgot who the painter was, who the artist was. But the guy who bought it from him recognized it and realized that it was a masterpiece. Okay, perhaps it wasn't ethical, right, buying it for peanuts and then selling it for millions, but he used his superior knowledge to gain an advantage, right, opportunistic behavior. So with transaction cost model, we try to reduce that opportunistic behavior as much as possible. Now, with the transaction cost model, a transaction is an exchange between at least two individuals. There have to be two parties to the transaction, right? Buyer and seller, supplier and customer. And an organization is a network of exchanges and contracts between and among members. Right? We are exchanging contracts with our suppliers, with our customers internally. Right? So we can appraise management information systems in the terms of why transactions use and produce information. What information do we need? for these transactions. And we build our information systems based on the information that is required for these transactions. Now, the transaction cost framework considers a number of uncertainties. First of all, the task. What needs to be done? What has to happen? What is the transaction between who and who? What is being transacted? What goods are being exchanged? So, right, there are a lot of uncertainties about the task. The technology itself that we are going to use, the environment, and then the behavioral or strategic factors. And the conflicts of interest between members. Obviously, the seller wants to maximize his profit. The buyer wants to get as much value for money as possible. So the seller will ask for a high price, the buyer is going to haggle to reduce that price. And with transaction costs, right, we see that there are different types of information processing costs for every transaction. First of all, there are search costs. Searching for the product or service. Where can we get this product from? Where can we get this component from? Who are the various suppliers? What prices are they asking for their products? Searching for the true price. Now, the true price there is the price that we are willing to pay, the price that will really give us value for money. Right? If it's something that is very, very rare, right, we would need to pay over the odds for it if there is a lot of demand for it. The second type of cost, the contracting costs. In certain transactions, right, the creation of an agreement to buy and sell a particular item can mean going into a legal contract, a legal agreement. For example, buying an ERP. If you're going to buy an enterprise resource planning system, it is not just going buying, contacting a supplier, telling me, okay, right, I'm going to send you an order for that ERP, and that's that. Right? There is a contract that needs to be agreed. What needs to be delivered? How is it going to be implemented? Who is going to do what? Right? So, right, a lot of costs go into crafting that contract. The third type of cost are control and regulation costs. Implementing the contract under conditions of uncertainty. If there is litigation between supplier and customer, we need to interpret that contract. We need to implement that contract. Right? We need to take the supplier to court, for example. Right? Are there any deviations from the contract and responsibilities? Did the supplier give us what was agreed in the contract? Did we give the supplier what was agreed in the contract? Perhaps we had agreed to give supplier our requirements by a particular date, and we were late by a couple of weeks. So we can't really tie down the supplier to a specific delivery date. If we were late ourselves, at least we should give him those 2 weeks leeway, right? The 2 weeks that we delayed the project ourselves. There could be the need to enforce sanctions, right? Going to court. It's very, very expensive, especially if right the court case is going to drag on and on. And then the final type of costs are maintenance costs. Right? The cost of resources for the exchange to develop from one phase to another. Buying an ERP, you've got your implementation phases. Right? A lot of work needs to be done. It is not just downloading software, implementing it, and that's that. All right, so there are a lot of costs that go in really actuating the whole contract. Now, the transaction cost will depend. Not all transactions will have those 4 types of costs. Right? If you're buying a tin of beans from a supermarket, right, you're not going to incur any of those costs. But The transaction cost will depend on three things, on three attributes. First of all, how specific is the asset? How specific is the product or service you are buying? Does it have to be a particular product? An ink cartridge, for example, it has to be a specific ink cartridge for your particular printer. Not all ink cartridges will fit your printer, so you would need to have a specific product. Talking about an ERP, right? It has to be specific to your industry. If you are in telecommunications, you're not going to buy an ERP that is done for the beverage industry, for example, the other way around. The recurrence, how often does the transaction occur? You're buying in cartridges frequently, right? Or more frequently than you buy enterprise resource planning systems. You buy an ERP once, hopefully that will serve you for at least 15, 20 years. You're not going to buy an ERP every 6 months. The uncertainty, internal, external, and behavioral uncertainty. Internal uncertainty. With an ink cartridge, you don't really have uncertainties. The only uncertainty perhaps has this ink cartridge were there any problems with the manufacturer? Is it half empty already? Right? But buying an ERP, the uncertainty internally, will it give us what we want? Will our users get used to using it? Will our users really get the proper training on how to use it? Externally, how good is the supplier? Can we rely on the supplier? How reliable is the supplier? What happens if the supplier goes bust while we are implementing the ERP? All right, so those three attributes, right, will fashion, right, will have an impact on the transaction cost. Now, how do we use information technology as a mediating technology? Because it can help in the exchange between parties. It can get parties together. It can reduce the cost of the transaction. First of all, by allowing more information to be communicated in the same amount of time, reducing that asymmetry. The customer knows more about what he's buying. It gives a better linkage between buyer and seller. With the technology that we have at the moment, communication is much, much faster. So the transaction can be carried out in a lesser time. It affords a more efficient contracting process. Right? So we don't need to spend months and months trying to negotiate a contract. With technology, we can, right, negotiate a contract in a very shorter period of time. However, although in general information technology will lead to lower costs, it is not always the case. Because sometimes the more information that we have, the more we spend on processing that information. Sometimes even search costs. Right? If we identify 3 or 4 suppliers, it is much easier to take a decision. If we identify 30, 40 suppliers, then it is going to be very problematic trying to sift through all the information that we are going to gather about all these suppliers until we decide which supplier to go with. Now, how does e-commerce fit into the transaction cost analysis? Now, first of all, we look at the impact of e-commerce on transaction costs. The search costs are reduced significantly. Now, as I said, this is generally, right? Generally, search costs are reduced significantly. We don't need to go to an agent to identify where we are going to get our components from. We can find them over the internet ourselves. So generally, we reduce search costs significantly. Sometimes, though, we increase them because there is much more information that we need to go through. It decouples product flows from market transactions. We don't need to be in the same place as the seller in order to transact business. Right? So there is that divorcing of product flows and market transactions. We can carry the transaction digitally, we can carry the transaction using communications without needing to be in the same place as the seller, but then obviously the product flow is going to be different. Buyers sometimes make purchasing decisions based on information without inspecting the products. If we have enough information and with this reduced information asymmetry and with much more information available via e-commerce over the internet, we don't really need to inspect products, especially if we are buying from a supplier that we've had previous communication with, previous relationships with, and we can trust that supplier. Now, information could be incomplete or distorted, so sellers could act opportunistically. So we have to be very careful with whom we are transacting and the veracity of the information that we have at hand. Okay, we reached the end of e-commerce. Any questions? Have I gone too fast, do you think?
For me, it's good.
Okay, anybody a bit muddled up with one of the topics we mentioned, one of the areas that we mentioned, or are you all okay?
Nothing uncertain from mind.
Okay.
Same here.
Okay, so anybody who has any issues, speak up, please. All right, if not.
Just a lot of information, so you need to process it. That's all.
Yes. But anyway, as I always say, right, when you revise and you find that you have certain questions that you need to ask. In fact, a couple of you sent me some questions over the week as well to clarify certain points. Right, just send me a message via Discord itself or via email. Right, and I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can call it a day. Have a good evening.
Thanks a lot.
And as I said, I'll send you an email to see your availability for the rest of the weeks, right, to see how we can fit in at least. I would like to fit in at least another session. Okay, and then we'll play it by ear. We'll plan it as it goes.
Okay.
Will be a revision session, sir. What will it be exactly?
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully, the additional sessions will be revision. I mean, if we add another session, let's say, just for as an example, this coming Friday, I will carry on with the material. Right? We start revision once we finish all the material. But I am calculating that with the sessions that are left, we will just manage to finish the material without having any time for revision. And I would like to have at least one revision session.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Do we have any past papers available as well?
There's a sample paper. Yes, good point. There's a sample paper on Moodle, which I posted over the weekend. Right, you will find it towards the end of the Moodle page. Right, so that you can get a good idea, right, of the type of questions that you would need to answer.
All right, good.
All right. In our revision session, I would like to cover at least ERDs. Right, and hopefully we'll also have time to go through that sample paper together. All right.
Okay.
Plus, obviously, any other problems that you might have.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Ciao, have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.